Hello everybody, welcome to Filmmaking Today. Boyan Dulabic here. So, question. Should we even think about this one considering the 4K version just came out? Well, let's talk about that. So, I'm sure you guys have heard the news last week, well, this week, I guess, a few days ago. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, the 4K version, was just announced at NAB, and damn, looks pretty good. So just a few days ago, or well, about a week ago or so, I made a video about this guy asking, is it even worth getting this one in 2018, right? And basically, my answer is, I mean, you can watch the full video; it'll be linked somewhere up here, there, I guess. So basically, my conclusion was yes, because of the image quality. You can boil down the whole thing to that argument. And I showed test footage using shooting in camera raw and all that stuff, and that's still true. However, we now have, or we will have soon, a 4K version that has basically all of these features and more. So let me go through some of the specs. This isn't going to be, I'm not going to go too in-depth into specs because there's gazillions of videos. I really want to focus on, what do we do with this guy now, right? So let's go through the specs. First of all, the new one, so this guy has a 16 millimeter sensor, right? Super 16 mil sensor. Well, the new one has actually a 4/3 sensor, so it's larger, which is great. And the good thing is, its crop is 1.9 times 1.9 as opposed to times 2.88, which is what this one is, right? So that's actually pretty good, right? So if you have a 25 mil lens, now that's going to be, well, a little less than 50 mil. Let's say it's 50 just for easy math, as opposed to, good God, what was it, 70-ish, something like that, with this one because of the crop factor, 2.88. So that's great. That is definitely something to think about. Now, from what I've heard, if you are shooting, so let me take a look here. If you are shooting at full HD, so 1080, at 120 frames per second, that crop factor becomes times 4. So that's what I've heard based on my research, which is something to keep in mind. So if you really want those slow motion shots, well, keep in mind that your 10 mil lens will become basically a 40 mil lens. Just something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about the format. So this one shoots in 24, 25, and 30 frames, while the new one will shoot obviously in 4K and 60 frames 4K. That's pretty sweet, right? Obviously, we'll shoot all the other ones, 24, 25, 30, and 60. So excellent there. And as I mentioned, if you're shooting in full HD, you can go as high as 120 frames. So you can get those sweet slow motion effects, which are always good. Obviously, you still get the 13 stops of dynamic range with the new one, just like with this one. It shoots obviously in a ProRes, all the flavors of ProRes, and it shoots in camera raw. Now there are talks, again from my research, that Blackmagic might do ProRes raw, which is Apple's raw codec, right? Officially, it won't ship with it. It will be Blackmagic's own cinema DNG flavor, which is pretty good if you ask me. But it might actually, maybe with the software update, it might actually include ProRes RAW, which would be even better because, again, my understanding is that ProRes RAW is an even better codec. It's easier to work with and all that good stuff. So that's, something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to the ISO, I know I said this won't be heavy on specs, but I got to go through this. This is pretty sweet. This guy goes up to 1600, and you know what? It works fine at 1600 ISO. I usually do 400, 800, but I have pushed it to 1600, and I did not notice too much grain or anything like that. Well, this new one will go as high as 25,000 ISO. Now, just actually technically it's 25,600. Now, just because it goes that high, it doesn't mean that it's all going to be all hunky dory at at that level. But my God, if you can only push it half of that, that's still a significant improvement from this guy. So again, yay, something to keep in mind. Now, here's a big thing that not a lot of people talk about that we should talk about, which is battery life. So I've talked about this to death. Battery life on this one sucks, blah, blah, blah. Not good, horrible. You need to use an external battery. I've mentioned that a million times. Well, the new one uses Canon LPE6 batteries. So they are different batteries from this guy here, which uses, I don't have my batteries here. Anyway, which uses different types of batteries. According to Blackmagic, the Canon batteries you'll be able to use them for up to an hour. I'm going to be very critical on that statement, because they also claim that the batteries for this guy you can use, I think they said an hour or at least 40 minutes, which again is not true. So let's be cautious on that statement, and let's keep that in mind. Now the good thing is, and I'll talk about that more in a bit, the good thing is that the new one you can actually power with basically, as far as I understand it, any power bank that uses USB Type-C, because the new camera has USB Type-C, and you can plug in an external battery and power it that way. So yay, that's good. Now again, you can power this one with an external battery that has a 12-volt output, so you still have those options with this one. But if you don't need a 12-volt output and you just need a external battery that has USB Type-C, well, that's a lot better, obviously. So that's good. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the screen. So as I mentioned in my review, this screen is fixed. Obviously, you cannot move it, swivel it, any of that stuff. You can't use it and yes, I will use this phrase again, you can't use it in selfie mode, because I have gotten comments that, oh my God, you don't use cinema cameras, in selfie modes. Well, actually, if you look at some of the higher end YouTubers, MKBHD, Dave 2D, Casey Neistat, yeah, they use cinema cameras. They use crazy red cameras and cameras on that level. And yes, they use the screen popped out basically in selfie mode. So yeah, I challenge that statement. Yeah, people do use cinema cameras in selfie mode. Sounds crazy, sure, and it probably is overkill in many ways, but the reality is people do that. So with the new one, it's a 5-inch screen, which is great. But same as with this one, you can't move it, you can't swivel it. You will need an external monitor if you want to actually use it in selfie mode. I said it again, and I'm not afraid to use that term. Thank you. So that's something to keep in mind. It is a touch screen, so that's great. It gives you, it just allows you to get things done quicker. Because I find the buttons on this thing, yeah, not the greatest when you have to go into the menu and all that stuff. Not great. So that's something to keep in mind. What else we got here? Audio, yes. So as most of you know, the audio on this guy, it's awful. I mean, obviously it has a mic input, so you can plug in a mic into this. But if you don't have an external amplifier, the audio is going to be just horrible. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be just crap, right? Now, the new one has a mini XLR input, and from my research, you do not need an amplifier. You just plug in that mic. It supports phantom power, so unless Blackmagic is lying on that one, you shouldn't have to use any kind of external amplifiers or anything. So that's great. So plug that sucker in and record the audio, and boom, all good. So that's good. What do you got? So stabilization, there's still no in-body stabilization, which sucks. So if you don't have a shoulder support or a gimbal or something like that, you will you know, if you want to handhold it, you will have to have a lens that supports in-body stable or supports stabilization. So you know, that's something to keep in mind. If you are a run and gun type of a guy, you know, like I am, that can present challenges. And when I shot my last feature project, Eugenics, as I mentioned in one of my videos, I did use this camera basically like this with the lens. Now, in some of those shots, I definitely had to stabilize it in post, and you know, it worked out fine. But it is something to keep in mind, right? When you don't have in-body stabilization, so keep that in mind. What do we got here? As I mentioned before, so it has USB Type C, the new camera port. So you can plug in various things. One of them is a hard drive. So the cool thing is, so it records on what is it, CF cards and SD cards. So you actually have those two slots. You can use them at the same time, so you have to choose between one or the other. Or you can use an external hard drive that has a USB Type C. Now that's cool, man, because just cost-wise, you know, for example, if you want to buy a 250 gig SD card, that's still pretty pricey. But if you want to buy a 250, you know, small portable solid state drive, that's actually cheaper. I mean, you can find these things for $100 ish, around there. So, and they're not that big anymore. You know, you can buy Samsung ones and other manufacturers. They're pretty small, so you can mount that somewhere on there, tape it, whatever, and that's cool. And the speeds do support, because it's USB Type C. They do support camera raw, so that is an improvement. There's no doubt about that, right? So that's good. But what do we got here? So it comes with DaVinci Resolve, which is worth $300 on its own. Now, if you're a guy like me and you don't use DaVinci Resolve, I mean, I live in the Adobe suite of applications for video. You know, I'll probably play around with it. I mean, I downloaded the trial version and played around with it. It's just, you know, I'm an Adobe guy and it works for me. So, but having that said, you know, it is a great program. There's no doubt about it, and you can always sell it, and you know, just use whatever you're using. So, but it's good to know that it comes with. Now, another thing to keep in mind: this new camera is also a photography camera. Now, there's a big asterisk to that, because even though you can shoot photos with it, they are 8 megapixel photos, right? So, you know, you can shoot them raw in JPEG, so that's all fine and dandy, but it's 8 megapixels. Now, 8 megapixels might be okay for certain things. You know, if you just want to get some shots of behind the scenes photos or whatever, actually it's probably going to be okay. But this is not a photography camera. This is a video cinema camera first, with, you know, photography options. So keep that in mind. But again, it's an update from this one, which doesn't do photography at all. The closest you can get to photography is if you shoot camera raw, and because it's all individual frames, just shoot for a second and extract one of those frames. You know, not the most desirable thing, but you could do it, right? But the new one does do photography. Physical buttons. So, as I have mentioned before, the amount of physical buttons on this guy, not the greatest. Definitely not the greatest. It's okay, but there's way too many times when I have to go into the menu to set, you know, basic things where that should have buttons, right? So the new camera has tons of buttons. You can, from my research, you can basically adjust, you know, all the usual suspects with those buttons. You don't have to go into the menu, which makes it basically similar to any DSLR or Micro Four Thirds camera out there, which is great. So that's all fine. Now, when it comes to portability, and this is something that you know, most people don't talk about. I've mentioned before, when I shot my last feature, that this thing is definitely portable by itself, right? So it's not just a camera where you have to have a rig and all that stuff. However, it's also not as portable as, let's say, the GH5 or you know, most other Micro Four Thirds or DSLR cameras that have, you know, in-body stabilization, that have you know, a screen that you can swivel and rotate and all that stuff. So it's not quite that portable, right? And this new one is no different. I guess it's maybe even a bit less portable because it is bigger, right? I mean, this guy really is pocket size. Whereas it's interesting, the new 4K pocket camera actually resembles their original cinema cameras from what I'm seeing, right? It's, you know, the style is more round and all that stuff, but it definitely reminds me of the initial cinema cameras that they discontinued, I don't know, I guess a couple of years ago or so. I think when the Ursa Minis came out. So it definitely reminds me of that. So, you know, it's not as portable, and especially if you need an external battery, if this new battery is not as great as this one, right? So that's something to keep in mind. If portability is your number one thing, and you know, quality is important, but you don't really care to shoot in camera raw, for example, you know, something like the GH, well, it's hard to say that because the GH5 is so much more expensive. But maybe the what is it, the GH80 or 85, you know, which is cheaper, probably around the same price. Maybe something like that might be more suitable for you, right? It all depends. It all depends. If you swear by camera raw, obviously, and 4K especially, that's your guy. You got to get that one, right? So it all depends. So the price on that one is $1,300. So they didn't make it $1,000 camera and you know, then lowered the price on this one, at least from what we're seeing now. It is $1,300. However, because you're getting DaVinci Resolve, which is $300, basically makes this a $1,000 camera. And an interesting thing, I don't know if this is a mistake, if you go on to the Blackmagic website and if you go under products, the 4K one is actually listed as $995, at least as of time, as of now, recording this. It is listed as that, and this one doesn't even, it's not even on there anymore. So maybe it will be a $1,000 camera, right? Now, if that's the case, then, all right, going back now to my original question, where does this fit in? Well, this is how I see it. If they don't lower the price on this one, and it basically is, this is a $1,000 camera and this is a $1,300 camera, I'd say, you know, forget about this one. You know, it's only $300 of a difference. Go with the 4K one. Even if you don't, and I still stand by my statement that I made in one of my videos, 4K is still not as important, especially for online distribution. It isn't. Now, shooting in 4K and then exporting in 1080 and getting more quality out of it, yes, that makes sense. And that's something I will probably start doing very soon. But exporting in 4K is still not important. Sorry, it's not. I live in Canada. Our internet bills are ridiculous. In the US, it's not much better. You guys are better. Not that much better. So, streaming in 4K all day is just not cost effective still in 2018. It's a sad statement, but it's reality. So, that's something to keep in mind. So, yeah, like I said, if you need 4K, you get that guy. If 4K just doesn't matter to you, and if they do what I hope they will do, which is drop the price on this one, so make that one $1,000, or even keep the $1,300, and drop this one to $800, $700. If they do that, I stand by my statement. Then this one still is worth getting, right? Because you get camera raw, you get 13 stops of dynamic range, you get a lot of things that you do get with the big guy. But if it's cheaper, you know, I mean, in the perfect Boyan world, that camera would be $500-600. Not gonna happen. But if $700-800, I think that's still worth it. I really do. You know, if you have $500 of a difference between this one and the new one, that makes sense to me. So, Blackmagic, if you're listening, I do think there's still room for this guy, at least for another year, maybe even 2. You know, if you got, especially if you got a bunch of these, you want to get rid of them, drop that price to $700-800, lower. And I do think you'll find customers when it comes to that. So that's it, guys. You know, I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts on that one. Another thing to keep in mind, which it's an important thing to remember. So this was announced to come out in September of this year, right? Now, Blackmagic doesn't have a great track record of releasing products on the dates that they announce it. So is it going to come out in September? If it does, and if you need a camera but it's not super urgent, yeah, I'd say pre-order it and just get it in September. But it's also possible that this might not come out until January or February of next year. That's almost a year away. So, at that point, again, you got to ask yourself a question. If you need, it comes down to two questions, really. Do I need 4K, and do I need a camera raw for video? If if the answer is no to both of them, there's other options. I'm actually looking at the G7, which you can get now for $500-600. Actually, sorry, it'll be cheaper in the US. Well, you can get it for $600, I think, with the kit lens and body only. You should be able to get it even cheaper than that, and it shoots 4K, but you can export it in 1080. So I'm actually looking at that one as my third camera for all this, and just as a second B-roll camera and that kind of stuff. So that's an option. I don't need the lens. I would just get a body. If you do need camera raw, you don't need 4K. Again, this is an option if you don't want to wait potentially a year, right? So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. Bottom line is, I know this is turning into an epic video. Bottom line of everything that I said is, I do think there's still room for this guy. Even with the 4K one, it all depends on the price and when you need it. So that's it, guys. Keep all these things in mind. Stay tuned for more. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, be nice, tell your friends, and stay tuned for more. This is Boyan Dulabic signing out. Thanks.